We're live.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Roll for Combat Live and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everyone. Look at this. We scheduled for January 1st. We're starting off the year with controversy. Kind of. I'll get into it. Light controversy.
Yeah, it's a controversy about controversy.
Well, that's right.
That's the weird thing, right? And the question on this stream is, why did the New York Times sort of bait out a war on this topic? And the answer is the same reason that YouTubers have controversial looking thumbnails, right?
I guess.
Because every once in a while, a major newspaper does an article about Dungeons and Dragons. I know, because even if it's not very major or interesting, a family member will send it to me and be like, "Look, Mark, Dungeons and Dragons was in a newspaper," right? And nobody talks about it. And the reason they wanted to make this article that was kind of culture war baiting instead of just talking about things at the time, you can tell based on when it happened. It happened after people were stirring up controversy on social media, not when the book came out, right?
Well,
so it's because they think that they'll get more other people to talk about it, just like this, by doing a controversial topic, right?
I guess.
Isn't that just the answer?
Well, look, you'll get into it. Mark already he finished. Okay, we're done. See you later, everyone. We're done. We didn't even get into it. Well, we'll get into it because there's more to it than that. So, yes, welcome to the new year. We didn't have a show last week because it was Christmas, and I guess no one wanted to do the show. I actually was around, but then I was too lazy to do the show. But then I was like, oh. But then I realized today it's New Year's, and once again, it's like, well, will we do a show? Will we do not a show? But then it'll be 3 weeks without a show, so I'm like, all right, I'll just do a show, even if it's a short one. And
yeah, we can do a quick one. This is a topic that it's made it to. The topic is that RPGs have made it to the news, but it's such a weird way of looking at the subtopic of how ancestry, species, race, and those things are in games. The way the article did it is very weird. So I think we can just do a quick episode on that.
We'll do a quick one, but actually, I was going to do a mini episode on this because this article came out 2 days ago, and my dad. This is when it's like, well, why are you guys covering this? Well, because it's actually important. Because my dad, who doesn't know anything about gaming or D&D or anything, he sent me the article. I woke up and he's like, here's an article. I was like, okay, that's why it's important. Because when it's
penetrated to outside of the nerdosphere, right?
Right. Well, this is the main reason. So the New York Times is one of the most influential papers in the world. And what happens is a lot of other papers will clip articles. So what they do is that the New York Times, AP, a few other big papers will actually offer their articles as snippets to other news organizations. And then because especially if you're in a small local area where they don't have a big newspaper, this was bigger when newspapers were bigger, is that what they'll do is that they'll literally rerun articles from the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or Washington Post or LA Times because they are, the big papers. So when the New York Times covers something, it's actually pretty important because that means other people will cover it, which is exactly what happened because after the New York Times article came out, more articles came out as well based off of the New York Times article. And this will probably continue to happen for the next couple of weeks. So
it didn't happen the last time that it wasn't a sort of baity topic. And it was just like, oh, you know what? People are playing Dungeons and Dragons and they're helping others by doing that, or they're connecting with their families or other things like that. Nobody picked it up in other places.
Correct. So that's why I thought it was important for us to cover this because it is, it's something we cover. And strangely, because, can you guys see us? Because people are saying we're running late. Can you guys see us? Are we live?
And they not see. I see us. So,
I see us.
I think they're just saying that the video is slightly behind or something like that for them.
No, that's weird. I
literally see us. Maybe just vet the person in chat.
Maybe reload.
Specifically needs to reload.
Yes.
Well, he's not gonna hear
Okay.
saying that. So
Okay. Everyone reload
there's
if you're
one
having the
person in
sync
chat who
issues.
needs to reload, but
Okay.
I think we're fine other than that.
Okay,
So,
just making sure. Anyhow,
yeah.
I've had 2 days to think about this article, so I've actually been able to put together cohesive thoughts. And are you ready, Mark? I
Okay.
got a new story for you that you've never heard before.
Okay.
Ooh. It'll come later, but but
Yeah, we can do that second side thing later because I'm interested about your cohesive thoughts. I, as a game designer, I saw some of this stuff coming on before you sent it to me, Stephen, because people were talking about it in some of the circles that I were frequenting and just talking about how it's so weird and kind of just baiting, or I guess based off of these online arguments that don't really matter to the game's design, what they chose to focus on. Because
yes.
changes in ancestries and species during different editions of Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder have happened pretty much every time. And there's been interesting changes to the game's design pretty much every time. And there are things you can really talk about in those changes. I'll give you one example. In Pathfinder First Edition, in the core rulebook, if you didn't get later books that would let you optionally change some of these things out, if you had a dwarf, they were always greedy, and they always hated certain other cultures and they just wanted to kill them. And that, if you built a character, they automatically had those abilities. Whereas in Pathfinder 2, you can choose to take abilities that are based on some of those themes, but you don't have to take them, which gives you more options from a game perspective. From a storytelling perspective, it's like, well, your dwarf could have been raised by other cultures or in other places. Why do they necessarily hate this particular culture or type of creature that they may have never seen before, right? So these are changes that, from both the game and the storytelling perspective, could make sense. And that's something that if there was an article about it, I feel like you could have a really interesting debate in both directions of people who like the change, people who didn't like the change. But all they focused on was the change of the word the word race into species. Something that by the definitions of the word race in any dictionary, there's like 50 different definitions, but the ones that anybody normally uses are ones that are like differentiating within a single species based on certain physical characteristics, right? So it's already more like scientifically and narratively accurate that these are separate species. It's not like Dragonborn and like Warforged, who are like literally made out of iron or adamantine, are from the same species as a human and just separate. So why is like this the whole article? And the reason is because that was what the online controversy was about, right?
Well, here we go. So I brought the article up, and I'm going to bring up a few others. So let's recap, because we kind of jumped in the middle quick. So here's what happened. So 2 days ago, let me give a full recap, and then we can get into it. 2 days ago, this came out in New York Times, and the title is Dungeons & Dragons Rolls the Dice. Oh, they're so sneaky there. With new rules about identity, and the subhead is, the role-playing game replaced race with species and divorced several character traits from biological identity. Some longtime players are upset, as is Elon Musk. What a weird article title to begin. I was like, what?
Yeah, like, that's a very weird subtitle down there. Why are they focusing on Musk? Like, he's not a D&D player. I mean, it's because it'll get the clicks, because he's a controversial figure.
Guarantee this is what happened. Okay. As someone, I used to work for a newspaper. I know I've done every job, but I actually worked with Jason McDonald, by the way, a newspaper. I was an entertainment editor, and I guarantee what happened is these guys were, they were very much aware of what's going on, and they saw that tweet by Elon Musk a few weeks ago, and they're like, okay, let's make an article about that, because it was, it would get the clicks, and it was doing really well. If you wrote about that when I was away, it was getting incredible. It was getting a lot of clicks, a lot of press. But they couldn't turn a whole article into it, so they had to somehow figure out how to make an article. Literally, a mountain out of a molehill. Like, this is the definition of a mountain out of a molehill. Because this is not an article that took a day to write. Because look at this. This is a long article. It has all these pictures. They went to people. They got quotes from people. And this was something that was probably worked on for a couple of weeks, and then it came out. Now, here's the crazy part is that if you read this gigantic article, it says nothing. It is like I've never seen a bigger article that says nothing. They basically say, "Hey, did you see that they changed the word?" It says right here, "Races are now species. Some character traits have been divorced from biological identity. A mounted dwarf is no longer inherently brawn and durable. A high elf is no longer intelligent and dexterous by design." And Wizards of the Coast, the Dungeons and Dragons publisher owned by Hasbro, has endorsed a trend throughout role-playing games in which players are empowered to halt the proceedings if they ever feel uncomfortable, which they're talking about kind of the X card.
Yeah, they're talking about safety tools in general,
safety.
but they kind of just swept it in there without explaining it.
Yeah, and they basically said changes have exposed a rift among Dungeons and Dragons players, a group as passionate as its pursuit is esoteric, becoming part of the broader cultural debate on how to balance principles like inclusivity and accessibility with history and tradition. Now, this article then brought out another article at Fox News. And this is probably the only time I've ever had Fox News on my browser. Dungeons & Dragons causes controversy with rule change over identity. And they had this article as a real...
It's just the same thing because New York Times ran it and everybody wanted to run about this. But here's the thing. Yeah. I don't think there's not a giant war about this going on. People maybe want you to think that, so
they want you to think that.
When this actually came out, this was months ago. And sure, a few people talked about it, I guess, online, where you're going to find something about any topic whenever it happens. But if you're actually out there with people who are playing D&D and you're talking to them, like, people didn't care that much. Some people thought that species was a little science fiction-y. I actually personally feel that it's a little science fiction-y. I like ancestry or heritage better for that regard.
I think ancestry would have been way better, but they can't. They're like they can't do it because Pathfinder did it. I
think ancestry was good. Okay, ancestry background class with ABC is good. I do think species is a little science fiction-y. I will admit that because we were considering it for Pathfinder 2 as well. Mm-hmm. They're all like more accurate, but given that, I just don't think this was a real war or a divide that was causing actual people to have a big issue about it. New York Times just wants to get quoted by everybody, wants to have all these articles come out, and like, I just don't think it's not a healthy thing for me.
Guess what? There's more articles.
That this article came out, Steven, because then we could have just been playing and enjoying the game, and with this article, just stoking things up.
Well, here's the funny thing. So this one is by The Telegraph. This article is actually pretty good. This one's interesting. Related topics: Netflix, woke, slavery, Reddit. Just think about that. Those are the related topics. I was like, wow. This is like, talking about red-button issues, man. And then even the subhead, Wokery Row as fantasy tabletop game criticized for removing racial differences between its cast of orcs, elves, and dwarves.
That's just such a weird... and it has like...
Wow, what an article. Oh, man.
Kind of a really cringy way of putting it as well.
But, it's so crazy. This one is actually... But this one, at least they rewrote the article.
Thanks for giving me the title and the subtitle. Let's not mention any of the other things that are within it because I'm already cringing at that. And this is, like, of course, like, the New York Times had to know that this was what they were doing. Like... They were baiting it. And it's not the same way that we talk about clickbait, whether you mean clickbait to be an episode of a YouTube show where the thumb doesn't even relate to the episode, or the more modern usage some people do with the provocative thumbs like Steven does on a lot of episodes. Whether you mean that or not, this is a different kind of baiting where they were baiting other people to just fan the flames in whatever direction that they were going. Like, because the article was kind of neutral-ish, other than the fact that it was baiting up a war, but it's leading to, partisans like that other article to come in and put a slant on it when really, like, what?
All right, well, let me think. So they actually were pretty interesting. This article actually is I'll read the safe parts. They said something fascinating because they said, okay, one user wrote on Reddit saying, feels like everything is focus grouped into an inclusive oblivion. Races and classes and fantasy make believe role playing game are gradually being reduced to aesthetics. And the demonstrification of things like goblins and orcs is also a travesty. Not everything has to be morally gray soup. Some things can just be inherently evil, and that's okay. But then they say, but sales figures suggest that the critics are in a minority. And then they say, WoTC told the New York Times that the 2024 Player's Handbook is the fastest selling publication in company history. So they do this pretty fascinating aspect of saying, oh, look, they're doing this and people are upset, but yet the sales are better than ever.
It's because people aren't actually that upset about this, except for a few people that you can find online somewhere. Well, you know that, Steven.
Yes, I know.
They're just trying to find anyone on the internet who's mad, which you can find about literally anything. I was reading on the other day on social media about somebody who made free chili for their neighbors and then was bullied off of social media due to the fact that people were like, what if they didn't want the chili? You're just forcing them to accept the chili, and we're just really raging against this person, right?
Yeah.
Like, you will find that if you are a newspaper and you want to find people who are bad, you'll find them. But it's not gonna look. If WoTC could do the OGL thing and all that other stuff and send the Pinkertons and people will keep buying, which they will, even if a few people are really mad about this, which is not very many, people are still going to keep playing the game in high amounts. It's not going to influence people's actual purchasing because it's not the kind of topic that the New York Times needs to be covering. And I guess I don't get to tell them what to cover. We cover weird topics on this show sometimes too, including this topic. But like, couldn't they have talked about something interesting about D&D? Or even if they were going to go into the topic of what changed with species versus race versus ancestry, like, they don't have to get into the weeds of the mechanics, right? But they could have actually at least focused on like some of the mechanical differences or how the game would play differently rather than just like the wording change.
Well, this reminds me of the Satanic Panic because so that all started, for those who don't know history, is that supposedly this kid went into the steam tunnels and disappeared in his college, and they blamed Dungeons and Dragons. In reality, he was very young. He was something like, I think, like 15 or 16, went to college, was closeted and gay, and went into the steam tunnels to kill himself, got scared, and took a bus somewhere else and was hiding. Now, what ended up happening is they found him, and unfortunately, the kid never got better, and he eventually did kill himself with a gun later, but it had nothing to do with Dungeons & Dragons. He just happened...
None of these things have anything to do with it.
Exactly.
People do it with video games, with D&D, whatever it is at the time that people want to blame for all of the problems.
Exactly.
Blame it,
But no one remembers the second part. Everyone remembers the first part of that. Oh, there was a kid who was, closeted gay in college way too early and was having issues mentally and was incredibly depressed. Oh, and he happened to play Dungeons and Dragons, and that's what the focus was. And that is what got a ton of press. And not only that ended up, there was a whole other aspect of the Satanic Panic, which I've mentioned on the show a lot if you watch, that kindergarten teachers were teaching satanic cult worship to kindergartners. Yeah. And some of these kindergartner teachers were put in jail. Okay, I mean, that was the other aspect of the Satanic Panic. And these articles and stories were being run on 60 Minutes, which was a big freaking deal back then, okay?
I didn't even realize, were they running it, like, unironically, completely without any skepticism, just being like, this is a big problem.
Yes.
The devil's really going to come on 60 Minutes?
Yes.
Oh, man.
This is 60
minutes. I was not
minutes.
aware that.
Yeah, you can find it on
YouTube. I actually am not big into what 60 Minutes did, so I didn't pay attention to that. That is not good.
Yes.
I mean, I know about things like, of course, Chick Tracks, right? We're talking about all of these things, but they are so ridiculous that they're like a self-parody. When you look at them, I've shown chick tracks to people who assumed that they were a joke that was made to like kind of parody that kind of stuff. And I was like, no, this was really published like very seriously by the people who made them.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, the world was it's for people who wasn't alive back then. It was very hard to really explain the world back then. Like there was basically newspapers and 3 television channels. And that's it. Okay. Like, and the radio. Like, that was it. If you wanted to get your news and information, you either read the paper, you listened to the radio, or you watched one of 3 channels of news. That's it. Okay. There's no internet. There was no million thing, like that was it. So if you saw something on the news, that carried a huge amount of weight because they only ran, quote, the big stories. And then you see something like this on 60 Minutes, okay? That is, I can't even emphasize how monstrously big that is in terms of news coverage, okay? You can't even compare, I don't even know what you can compare it to in today's fragmented world of YouTube and Twitter and every billion, news article aspects where you can get news everywhere and there's 5,000 channels. So, anyhow, back to this is that what I find so interesting about this is that they're trying to, I don't know, they're just trying to turn something, they're trying to basically use Elon Musk's tweet, because later in the article, of course, they bring up Elon Musk. All 3 of them do that. And they say, how dare they try to rewrite the history of D&D? How dare they try to, change terminology of D&D, and we'll keep, stuff like that. I have been watching over the holidays I was basically bored and nothing to do, and Mark was away, so I could only do so much work because Mark and I share a brain, so half my brain was off. So I was doing what I could without Mark, and so I was kind of just sitting here watching a lot. And one of the things I was kind of watching was fascinating, is Dungeons and Dragons a game or is it storytelling? Now, the point of this being way back when...
So you mean gamist versus narrativist versus simulationist?
Yes. When D&D was first made, it was obviously based on a war game.
It was chainmail.
And it was very much... It was very antagonistic. It was literally the DM versus the players, which in reality was the dungeon versus the players. But these games the DM is trying to kill you, and they're not
brutal. If you didn't say that you looked at a certain tile, it was just like, you stepped on it and you died sometimes.
Yeah. It was beyond brutal. And it was not even a game. It was like a slaughter fest. And then slowly it turned into a game. And it's one thing Mark and I know a lot about is gaming and game design and game theory. And the thing about gaming is one of the main aspects of gaming is there has to be a push and pull. There has to be conflict that you need to overcome, and storytelling as well. And by overcoming conflict and adversity, you then either get points or you progress through the game or you, quote, win the game. And this can be very esoteric and very minimalistic, as in Mahjong or cards, where the thing against you is the other players and the deck itself, and you just pulling and determining and getting the right cards. Or it could be that you're literally fighting other players in a war game or chess, where you're literally trying to, strategize better than your opponent. So there's a lot of ways this can work.
Right. And conflict's not just important for games, right? If you do
stories,
playwriting or script writing, and they'll tell you each scene, it should have some kind of a conflict. And that doesn't mean that the characters hate each other who are in the scene together, but they should have some conflict of interest, even if they're mostly working towards the same goals. Just something, maybe you've got a scene between 2 characters who are on the same overall side in your play or movie, but one of them wants to get the other one to go out to drinks with them that night, and the other one doesn't and wants to go home. If you have some kind of conflict in the scene, it makes the scene more interesting, and the audience is going to want to watch to see how it gets resolved. There can be negotiations that happen during the scene. etc. So that's in games. That's also in movies and plays, which are another sort of element that is combined into tabletop RPGs. So I'm with you on that, Stephen, that you do want to have some tension or conflict.
Now, what D&D, in my opinion, and it's not a bad thing, but the current owners of D&D, especially with 5th edition, have slowly been moving D&D over from less conflict-based, where conflict is really just between the characters and the monsters, and maybe traps, and maybe the environment. But the conflict is almost part of the storytelling. Like, the conflict is there, but, well, it doesn't necessarily kill your characters. It's more of conflict in storytelling. It's more conflict in narrative. And, oh, you stepped on that and the trap went off. Well, you didn't die. You just got hurt a little, which is fine. You don't need to kill everyone every time. But it's definitely a different game. You know, it's like, I think about that a lot. Like, it's just such a different game. And I think that's what they're trying to really say in these articles, is that the older game, and even, believe it or not, even Elon Musk, is that the older game was kind of brutal, and it was kind of sexist, and it was kind of misogynistic. And you know what? That's just the way the game was. Like, yeah, no one apologized for it. Also, this game was written for like 100 people. Okay, this was an extremely small group of people who decided to make a game for themselves and their friends. They weren't trying to mass market this thing, and they were turning into a $1 billion property. And even Gary Gygax, when it was starting to become a bigger property, he did, and the Satanic Panic was going on, he actually had to sanitize the game, and he had to make decisions. They took out devils and demons, and they renamed them because that was a big problem. This is not something that is new to 5th edition. This was happening even in 1st edition and 2nd and
things
3rd.
Art always has to change with the current climate of culture, of politics, of anything that's happening around then, Stephen. I think that's true. And the conflict changes just as the game changes, but that doesn't mean you can't have a very conflict-heavy 5th edition game. It will have to depend on your GM. Now, the fact that the system as written is like easier to build characters that can kind of just bust through and win, if your GM doesn't also buff up the opposition, that does have an influence on things. And having fewer just instant death, haha, traps, that'll have an influence on things. But you can still have like major Game of Thrones style political intrigue if you want in your D&D game. Now, does D&D have a lot of mechanics that are like tailor-made to make it easier to do Game of Thrones style intrigue? It doesn't. Not really. A lot of tabletop RPGs, especially like the big ones like D&D and Pathfinder that have a war aspect to it, a battle encounter mode, generally focus a little more on fighting than they do on those kind of things. But you can have any of those kind of conflicts and just sort of tensions in any RPG. D&D, I wouldn't say stops you from doing that. It just doesn't necessarily help you from doing that too much.
Some of the people are, by the way, they're saying, oh, Gygax was out by the time 2E came out.
Yeah, I think he was out by the time they had to do Tanari and Battlezoo.
Keep in mind, Gygax, by the time then TSR had hundreds of employees, and Gygax was literally he was in LA partying and doing drugs and doing the whole LA scene. He wasn't doing a lot of game design back then.
Well, but I think he had been like hostile takeover by the time they had to do that.
Oh, he was, but they still trust. Don't forget, deities and demigods had to be rewritten, and he was still around at that time. They were still making changes, and they were still adjusting things.
He was there for the D&D demigods rewrite, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, he definitely was. But so what thing we wanted to talk about is that and he was trying to push D&D. Someone actually wrote to say he was trying to push D&D to the mainstream. That's actually why he was in Hollywood. He's trying to make D&D movie, and he did do the D&D cartoon, which, if you want to talk about being very different and kind of soft compared to the hardness that is in D&D, take a look at the D&D cartoon. Okay, like that. Talk about the biggest. That kind of misrepresentation. It's like, here's a cartoon and it's all about Dungeons and Dragons and it's fun and fantasy and there's little kids and unicorns and it's like, oh, okay, and it's literally on Saturday morning cartoons and you watch it and then you buy D&D and then you're like, oh, it's all about Satan and devils and demons and Tiamat and killing everything. It's like, wow, this is not what that cartoon was representing whatsoever.
In that era, that was generally true, right? Like when I was when I was little, I watched like the old, they had like He-Man and She-Ra and all those cartoons for the action figures. And they were like very kid friendly. Here's a lesson at the end of it. But if you actually look at the comics that came with the action figures that the people were originally creating, they were like really gritty and violent and like bloody and stuff. And it had been just completely sanitized for the cartoon that little kid me thought of as being the thing. So honestly, when I was exposed to other things as a kid that were based off of really the original material, I was like, this is wrong. This is nothing like why is this so horrible? Right? So you can even get it in the opposite direction where someone experiences the newer version or the version that is marketed towards them. And the original content makes them be like, ugh?
Yeah, trust me. You watch some kids' movies, like this was like 10-ish years ago, is that when my kids were small, I was like, you know what I'm going to buy? I'm going to buy The Goonies because I loved that movie when I was a kid. And I was like, you know what? I'll put it on. I'll put it on for my kids. I remember watching this when I was a kid. I turn it on. The kids are swearing, they're smoking, they're drinking, and I'm like, oh my God, this was a kid's movie. I was like, welcome to the 80s, man. I was like, I forgot. Wow. And I had to turn it off right away. Now, again, a few years later when they got old, they were like 6, and like 8 when I wanted to show it to them. I thought it was a little much for them at that point. When they were older, I had no problem showing it to them. And E.T., even in E.T., if you remember, they're like all the bad guys are carrying around guns, and Steven Spielberg redid it to take that out because he thought it was a little over the top, a little too violent, and made them, carry walkie-talkies. That's actually one of the few changes I actually kind of sort of agree, because the guns don't add anything to it. Like whether they're carrying guns or whether they're carrying walkie-talkies in the larger sense does not affect the story of the art whatsoever. As opposed to Han shot first versus not. That's a change.
That actually changes his character.
That changes his character. That is not something you change, no matter what you think. So we
got a lovely tongue-in-cheek super chat from Dungeon Craft. It says, "Happy New Year. The New York Times created clickbait because that is the only thing that gets views, unlike my very ethical, content-driven channel."
Yeah, that's right. Yes, Professor just did a fantastic article, because he and I talk all the time. Sorry, he did a big video of like why he does clickbait now. And he goes into explain in detail that he doesn't do that much clickbait, and he still covers his regular topics. And he goes to extreme detail to explaining why clickbait works, and people want to see it. Period. It's simple as that.
I just wish it didn't. I wish that I could cover, like, on my own channel, which does not do clickbait, that we could just cover topics that are like, get better at these aspects of tabletop RPG stuff, with some wide aspects everyone needs, some narrow things that you might not need, but that if you do, you really need it because people don't talk about it a lot. Building things on the stream, stuff like that. But yeah, that doesn't, like, we don't get a lot of views from
Indestructo Boy is here too, by the way. Everyone's here because no one has anything to do. I told my family we had lunch and we're like, what are you doing today? I was like, oh, we're going to do a video. They're like, really? I go, no one's doing anything. It's like, oh, I guess you're right.
I'm sure
no one's around.
I can see why your family was surprised. My family is also always surprised when you're doing something, Steven. So your family were probably like, you could convince Mark to do it on New Year's Day? And I'd be like, yeah. You know what? On Christmas, the entire my wife's entire family was here, so there was no
Christmas chance. I wasn't going to do it
on New Year's Day.
I was too lazy.
Other family members, like the extended family members, are gone. I am still at my wife's family's place, but there's not a lot of people around, so I knew I could duck out for, like, an hour or two.
Yeah, we're not going to go too crazy. So one thing I wanted to mention, and then we'll get to the second aspect of this,
Yeah,
is
interested
that
to the second story.
this not the second story, but the aspect. So what I found fascinating. Okay, here's a new story that no one's ever heard before. Mark, you've never heard this story. I always tell them stories.
What have I never heard?
Okay, there's actually no, it's relevant. So here's the story. So I used to go to, there was a great convention here called Icon. It was one of the biggest sci-fi conventions on the East Coast, and it was around forever. And it was at Stony Brook. I loved it. I would talk at it almost every year. They had amazing guests, and who went to it every single year was JMS, the creator of Babylon 5. And when I mean creator, he created and wrote and directed like almost every episode. Like, he really had a strong hand. Well, he actually has a world record for one season. I think it was like season 4 that he wrote every single episode of an hour-long show. And that's back when it was
I knew he created it, but I didn't realize that he wrote an entire season as the writer. That is a tour de force.
And that's when there was like 26 episodes a season, and the episodes were like 48 minutes long. You know, like this was like, you know, not now where they're like 40 minutes long and they have like 12, you know, 12 episodes a season. So he wrote every single episode. JMS is, he's insane. Look him up. J. Michael Straczynski.
Straczynski, I think.
Straczynski, I can't pronounce it.
But with the V, you would have Igor Straczynski, who wrote The Rite of Spring. I think it's Straczynski.
Straczynski.
But
he would also, the other person who was there all the time was Harlan Ellison, who was one of his best friends and was a creator on the show. And oh my God, talk about oh boy.
He's known for suing everybody.
He was the best guest I've ever seen. Wherever he went, I never missed him. I saw him in person probably 50 times, and every time was one of those, you'd sit there with your mouth open because he gave no shits about anything, and he just said whatever he wanted, and he did not apologize. And wow, was he amazing. Anyhow, during a Q&A session, and this was when Babylon 5 was in its like first or second season, and Babylon 5 was a very different take. It was one of the very first shows in history. Now remember, this never happened. Nowadays, everyone is used to episodic TV shows and binging, where each show, you know, it's a series of shows and it's one long story over the course of, you know, a year.
Myth arc, right?
No one did that. No one. And that's why, you know, like they might have an overall arc in the show, but they never had one show compare, you know, like linked to another. Like the only ones that did that were soap operas, but dramas never did it. You know, like they kind of lightly did it, like LA Law would kind of do it, but each episode was a bottle episode, meaning that it was completely contained within itself. Well,
weren't bottle episodes also ones that like it contained in a very specific set that they already had in advance, like the ones on Star Trek where it's like, we'll just do it on the ship because we don't have enough money after
bottle episodes are actually a different thing, but I'm called it Mark got the right. I actually used the term wrong, but whatever.
I wanted to make sure because you were very knowledgeable about TVs and movies, and I'm trying to learn.
I actually used it incorrectly.
I wasn't wrong about that.
Bottle episode is actually something different, but I use it as a terminology, is that it just is self-contained. How about that? That's a better term. So you can watch it in any order. And there's a lot, I won't get into the reasons, but anyhow, they do it for reasons, mostly reruns. Mostly the shows weren't always necessarily run in the same order, believe it or not, depending on where you were in the country. Sometimes they'd run in the wrong order. So this was important that they didn't run, you know, they didn't have to have the shows in order. Nowadays, that doesn't matter because things are very different. So this was one of the very first TV shows ever in history where you actually had to watch it in order. Okay, you actually had one story that took place. It was supposed to take place over 5 years, but he was worried it was going to be canceled, so he actually had to rush the last year. So it took place over 4 years, and there literally was a beginning, middle, and end. And this was it was incredible. Like, it is groundbreaking. It was one of the very first shows to ever use computer graphics in its animation. It was the first show to really hit on serious sci-fi topics, adult topics, drug use, death, like really you'd look at it now, you'd laugh, but 30 years ago, this was really, really, really cutting edge. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of the sci-fi stuff, which is very like everything's gonna be great, like futurism and optimism, and so it didn't want to look hard at those kind of things.
Yes, right. And there was no streaming back then, so if you missed
it's like
Babylon 5,
it's just like,
you're in trouble.
What are those Centauri people even doing? I don't understand why they're doing this thing now. I missed 2 episodes, and now I'm lost.
Right. What are the Borderlands doing? Thank God the internet was still around. Actually, the internet was still in its infancy back then, but there were like Babylon 5 discussion boards, so you could actually catch up on episodes in case you missed it. My friend John Stats, who's one of my regulars, he taped every single episode and would never miss an episode so that we can rewatch it. Okay, that's how
smart.
much we loved it.
That's smart.
Now,
I'm glad I got into it after streaming, so that I didn't have to worry about that.
It holds up. I mean, yeah, it's a little cheesy in parts. It holds up. It's a great show.
I watched it. I watched these episodes people said to skip because I figured I would just watch it.
They're not all winners, but it's good. It's good.
But it's fine. It's good. Good.
Now,
I liked it.
Yeah, so here is one aspect. So I was in the audience and someone raised their hand. And I could tell, and we're all geeks here. We've all been to those Q&As where someone raises their hand and you look and you go, oh no.
Are they going to try to actually the creator with some kind of technical question?
Yes.
Is that what it was?
Well, yeah, I'm telling you, here's the story. Okay. So I'm here and he raises his hand and he says, I love Babylon 5. It's great. I think it was like second season. It was like only first or second season. I think it was maybe first. And now remember, Babylon 5 was on at the same time as Star Trek The Next Generation. It was the very end of Next Generation, but they were on at the same time. And he said to JMS, and I could tell this guy was beaming and he thought he was going to really convince him. And he says, you know, I love Babylon 5, but why don't you have more children on the show like Star Trek? And JMS says, I have no intention of ever having children on Babylon 5. It is, I'm talking, basically saying I have a very, we're trying to talk about very serious topics, adult topics about the military, about life being, what it is to be human, what it is to fall in love and have family. And there might be children in the show as part of a topic, but I'm not going to have a child actor like Crusher in Star Trek The Next Generation. And this person started to get pretty angry. Like, this was like, well, why not? It's like, and he started to kind of get into it, JMS, like he really wanted to have kids on Babylon 5. And JMS cut him off and said, oh my God, I'll never forget this. He goes, well, if you want kids, then you should make your own television show and put them into that. And I was like, damn! I was like, wow! Whoa! I can't believe he went there. It was much harsher than I'm making it out. But basically it was like, yeah, if you want kids, go make your own TV show. Next question. And this guy was crushed. I remember looking at him. He was devastated. And I was thinking, this guy probably had it in his mind. I'm going to tell him, why don't you have kids? And JMS is going to be like, oh my God, you're right. Why do we have kids? You're so smart. We should definitely have kids.
He could be like, I'm the guy who added kids.
Oh my God. Would you like to come and write for the show? And maybe you could add the kid. Like, I could see the wheels turning in his brains because he was so distraught and really started to yell at JMS because he didn't have kids in the show. I'm like, dude, he explained why. And this is not your show. This is his show. This is his vision. Respect it and move on, man. And this guy, I always think about this every so often because that is the creative vision of the person who made the show. And whether you like it or whether you don't like it, you have to at least respect it. And more importantly, you don't have to watch the show. If it bothered you that much, then don't watch the show. Which is when I read these articles, I think about that in the same sense. You see where I'm coming at this, Mark?
Right? Yeah. No, I want to tie that back in because I think you could, like, if internet and social media had been where they are now, that one guy could have gone home, posted some kind of random rant that maybe got picked up by Elon Musk, and suddenly the New York Times would be saying, giant culture war in the Babylon 5 fandom
Exactly.
between those who want children in the show and those who do not.
Right.
Fans of other popular show Next Generation say that Wesley Crusher and other children being on the ship is helpful. Here we have quotes from this one angry guy. Then we couldn't really find that many people who cared on the other side, which is true for the New York Times article too. So we just found some random people to to say some things.
Exactly.
And now look at this controversy. Look at this war.
Right.
There's this fandom is about to tear each other apart about whether children is. It's like, no, it was one guy who was mad who was in the thing. And it's just, this is where we're at now that it gets amplified. And you know what? Part of the problem is just what people are interested in seeing. Like, and the question is the fact that we're analyzing that and trying to shine a light on it and say this is like not necessarily a good thing, is that helping, or is this also like contributing because we made a YouTube video that was about the same kind of supposed war that's not really a war?
Well, I made this video and I thought we should talk about this. It's because I want people to be aware that why I think the New York Times did this, in my opinion, is that they were basically trying to figure out a way to write an article about Elon Musk, and they saw it got a lot of clicks. And I bet
you have to be right based on the timing.
Based on timing,
Stephen, when you have your theories about, well, that we're secretly doing this, you know that I'll say I don't agree when I don't agree.
Yeah.
But I had the same theory as you without you telling me that was your theory, because if they actually cared about this topic, they would have done it in June of last year.
Oh, yeah, they would have done this a while ago.
They would have done it in June of last year. That actually is when some people were talking about it, saying maybe it sounded a little sci-fi, and there was interesting back and forth to be had about it, even regardless of the fact that I like the change. I like ancestry, I like heritage, I like lineage too. Right. But they didn't do it then. They waited until after this whole drama was happening. So I'm with you on the fact that they were just trying to pick up the drama, and they were hoping that the drama would amplify them too. Yeah.
Well, I again, we always try to come from this. Everything I come from is from a business point of view as to why are they doing this? Really, because they'll say what they do. They'll say, "Oh, we're doing it for this." I'm like, "No, that's not true. Why are you really doing it?"
And I try to look from the game design side when I can.
Right. I look at it as the business side, because you know what? I'm in these meetings, and let me tell you, oh my God, some of these meetings you wouldn't believe what the things they say in these meetings. Like, they're as bad. That's the one thing television does get right. As bad as you think these meetings are, they're much worse. Some of these meetings. I was on a meeting when I was working in advertising. I don't know if I told you the story either. Yeah, 2 news stories from me, Mark. And I was working with Tissot. Tissot was a watch manufacturer. I don't know if they're still around. This was 31 years ago, 1994. And we were doing a pitch for them. And Tissot had watches, and some of them are like, back then, when money was much more expensive, like some of them were like $100 watches, $300 watches, $1,000 watches, when $1,000 was $1,000, and we're talking to them, and I was with an ad agency at the time, and I'll never forget one of the Tissot members said this in the meeting. He said, we're going through the different types of watches and how to brand each one, how to brand the $1,000 watch versus $300 watch. And the guy says, you know what? The watches, they're all the same. It cost $50 to manufacture and $950 for that little Tissot symbol. And that's it. And I was like, damn! I was like, and he literally said the $1,000 watch and the $100 watch, they're the same watch. It was just they're paying one watch, you're paying $50 for the Tissot symbol. The other watch, you're paying $950 for the Tissot symbol. And that's it. And I was like, damn, man. It's like, and I think about things like that all the time whenever I see things that are special editions or an upgrade or so forth. And
that's why I appreciate it when that you didn't like that, and so you always made sure that the special editions that we're making are really special.
Right.
And you were just like, I'm getting 100% on everything, and we're getting gold on the side. We're getting these bookmarks
I was going to pat myself on the back, but I was going to say, when we do special editions,
I appreciate that from you, Steven.
Try to make them
upgrade.
I try to make them actually special.
Yeah, it's a modest increase in price.
Right.
With a lot of special stuff on it, and not some kind of Tussauds. It's 10 times as much, and it's the same watch.
Right. We try to actually do something nicer. I try to actually give actual reason to upgrade and get something nicer.
I can see now that's your origin story for always adding more content and making things more unique. Is just how horrified you were by.
It was horrifying, because I was like, wow. And even now, whenever I look at things, I'm like, I want to make sure that you really get a value add whenever I look at something that's better or special, or, like, or a reason, like cars are actually, I mean, I know you don't drive, but cars are actually one things where you actually can, when you get a better car, not always, but often, you actually will get more for the better car, which is good.
You might have better safety features.
Not necessarily better safety, but you'll have like better speakers or a sound system or better heating or heating steering wheel. Like, that's an upgrade. Like, okay, one has a heating steering wheel, one doesn't. That is an actual upgrade. One has heated seats in the back, one doesn't. Okay, that's an actual upgrade, as opposed to, I've seen the upgrades like, well, you get red for an extra. I've literally seen that. It's like, you get the color red for an extra 3,000. Like, that's it. I don't care that much about, I don't care that much about the color red, or the color purple.
Steven, the fact that red is more expensive means you're not the red target audience, because
those people want to show off. I know
that it's more expensive. It's conspicutive consumption. Like,
they want to show off.
Then they should. Then whenever you see someone who had red of the same car, that they paid $3,000 more just to be red, and then that actually is something that has value to those kind of people.
Oh, dude, we're talking about video game skins. That's a whole other topic. That's the skin culture war. If you want to get into that. So the other topic, we've talked about a whole bunch. Right, status is the entire product. Very good point. Now, I've been thinking a lot about this in the last week, is D&D becoming so narratively focused, and are they sanding off the edges so much that there is really no difference between a dwarf and an elf and a drow, other than visually, then mechanically, they're becoming so similar that, like in the old game, like, if you wanted to become a spellcaster, well, you were either human or you were an elf, okay? You weren't a dwarf, because dwarves suck at spellcasting. And if you wanted to be something, like, kind of strong, well, you weren't an elf, because they sucked at that. They were, like, you became a dwarf or a human or a half-orc or something else. It's like there was actually sort of limits based on these races, that's what they're called, because of the way they were set up. And now this was mechanically within the game.
Yeah. You know what, Steven? Mm-hmm. This is the interesting question to ask about the changes, is how they go from a narrative to a gamist perspective. Here's my answer for you as a game designer about that. Obviously, there are different ways of doing things. Now, I want to make sure it's clear, because we have seen, how they did species in 2024. We have built species for D&D 2024 that are very different.
Yeah, we know.
Even using all the new rules that they have. I don't want you saying that our Titans and Trolls. I was going to say,
you see our 2025 species.
That our 2025, that our new books that are coming out are exactly the same as just being a dwarf or an elf.
Dude, I just did Snow Souls.
I don't want you to, I don't want you to be putting down those authors, of which is me.
So Snow Souls is crazy.
Snow Souls is crazy, right? Isn't it cool?
It's based on temperature, man. Like the things you can do. It's crazy you
have different things depending on the temperature range. You could actually like melt a little bit if it gets too hot. Right. You can freeze yourself to get additional powers.
Yeah.
It's got stuff in there, and you can. But the question is kind of twofold. One is the minor, very rulesy question of what about the fact that they completely removed attribute boosts from the species.
Mhm.
Now, I kind of like the way Pathfinder did it, but I'm biased, right? Pathfinder 2, where you can get attribute boosts from species, but you can also remove them by canceling them out in certain ways. So it'd be like, you know what? You're a giant. Okay, you're large. Yes, you're a giant. You're getting some amount of strength compared to a halfling, probably, but you could cancel it out for certain trade-offs and just do something else. But if you liked what you were getting involving strength, then you can go for it. Like, I like that way of doing it in some ways, because I think it gives you the best of both worlds. But that notwithstanding, they didn't remove the ability to still have certain special abilities that your ancestry possesses your species. I'd say ancestry because of Pathfinder 2.
Doesn't matter. We know what you're talking
race,
about.
Ancestry. Everyone knows what I'm talking about, I hope. So I think that actually, from a game design perspective, it's more fun to have these species or ancestries they have to give you some real choice.
Yeah.
Where you're really having an opportunity cost, and you're like, oh, you know what? I could have picked dwarves and had more hit points and ability to move without slowing down and heavy armor and stuff, or whatever you're going to say that dwarves have. But instead chose elf, and I got this other thing. I think that's very important for character building, because it can be interesting, whether that is something where you can choose the option, like in Pathfinder, or not. However, I actually don't think it's good game design to be all the way into what you were saying, where it's like, well, yeah, fighter, I guess it's definitely going to be a dwarf. Oh, it's a mage. Yeah, it's definitely going to be an elf. So that actually gives you fewer options.
Mhm.
It gives you less choice, and your game is sort of set for you, because it was like, well, yeah, I'm just going to be terrible if I do anything other than this. Maybe an archer for the elf too. So I feel like, actually, I see where you're coming from, and I agree with the overall point, but I do think that harsh attribute limits that that completely lock you out of certain classes without being much worse actually is not good. So that's where I'm at on that.
Well, I feel that D&D, especially when you played it as long as we have, like, it was getting really limited, because it's like, okay, we get it. Like, maybe the first time you play, it's like, okay, elf, dwarf, but after the 50th time you play, you want more options. And you kind of want, you basically just want more options. You want to sort of like try something out new and sort of expand. And that's why I think Pathfinder 2nd Edition did they did it perfectly, because it gives you limits and choices that you have to make, but it doesn't feel limiting. And I think 5th edition went almost too far, that anyone can be anything. And I'm like, well, that's too far the other way. I think
that you have a good point on that.
Yeah.
And I have actually seen people who, they have no problem with, or even agree with, the change name from race to species, and generally even like the fact that you're taking out, like, well, all dwarves are automatically greedy and they hate giants no matter what, even if one was raised as an orphan by giants. They like that. But I have seen some of those people who said, well, but they may have gone a little bit too far by not letting us have a few more doggles to play with here. So I think there is a conversation to be had, even among people who broadly approve of the direction, that the specifics might have been amiss. And I think you might be, well, you can't be right or wrong about it. It's an opinion. And some people think that. And it's not this weird war with two sides that's about culture. It's a nuanced situation when you get into the game design that has 50 or 100 different sides, and they're not really sides. They're just ideas or opinions that can have an interesting and diverse discourse about what's going on, and whether you'd be like, well, what if you did it this way? I don't know. I really enjoyed working on Pathfinder 2 and coming up with some of these ideas and changes for it. I'm glad you like how we did it in the end. There were like 30 or 40 proposals. I thought it was fun being like, well, this one's good in this way. What if we could do it this other way? Logan and I spent a few hours with Ancestry background in class playing around with where the attributes could be. We didn't initially have them in backgrounds when we first started out. We eventually, we had certain goals that we both wanted to hit with the creation system. And in the end, we're like, I came up with something that was very similar to this, where it's like, we need a pyramid with 4, then 3, then 2, and then 1. 1 being the class. And then Logan and I worked it out, and he's like, we can even theme it like a life path, where you're going through life and taking these decisions. And I think it was great, but it was not even one of the first 20 ideas that we had for how to do it. So there's a lot of, I'm hugely interested in hearing people's opinion of whether you think it was a hit or a miss in the exact details for D&D. I just think that the New York Times article is focusing on the uninteresting part. I don't know. Do you agree with that, Stephen?
No, of course they just were trying to fight. They were trying to start a war. They're starting to like just start. Yeah. They were starting to stir the pot and make some shit up and just make people angry. I'm like, really? It is the definition of a mountain out of a molehill. And people actually, the quotes they have, like, they brought up some interesting parts. Like, yeah, like, is D&D, but this is more of, is D&D changing aspects of the game? And we didn't really get into this. Are they changing aspects of the game to become broader and have more appeal? Or do they feel that it actually makes a better game? And I want to know, when you were designing Pathfinder 2nd Edition, did that ever come into consideration?
Oh. Yeah, we thought it made a better game with this system of how these attributes are now. Not all of our viewers right now maybe know exactly how that works, so I will tell you very briefly so you don't have to go into a giant understanding of it. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the way it works is that your ancestry determines basically either 2 or 3 attribute boosts, and if it gives you 3, you also get a flaw. All right. One of those you get to select, and the others are from the ancestry, but there are ways to switch it around so that you just get selections, but you'll never get 3 if you do it that way. And then your background gives you 2 attribute boosts, one of which is chosen from a set in your background, one of which you can select whatever you want. Then your class gives you 1 that might be an option to pick, but you get exactly 1 from your class. Then that's going to be your key ability score for your class. And then you can pick any 4 of the 6 attributes to raise, just to sort of like, well, you know, you were going through early life and you raised these 4. All right. So I call it pyramid because you have one attribute that you have one that's 1, one that's 2, one that's 3, and one that's 4. Crucially, okay, this gives you 10 raises, which is about the number that Logan and I wanted to give, but it cannot allow you to get an 18 or a +4 in the new remaster Pathfinder 2 on more than one attribute, because it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. So the most you could get the 18 on is if you picked the same attribute in all 4 categories, and there was no way to get 2 in the top of the pyramid in your class. So it was very important because it gave the attributes we wanted in the places that we wanted, with the freedom to move it that you wanted, and without letting you min-max completely and be like, well, okay, you have 10 boosts that can go wherever you want. Great. I'll have 2 18s. Or even I'll take 3 18s and like 2 8s that I gave penalties to, and something like that, right? So it had some mechanical things it did that we wanted. It had some narrative things that it did that we wanted, and we just thought it made for better gameplay when we tried it out. That's why we did that change to character creation. Now, the name Ancestry was changed because, well, first of all, ABCs, although that wasn't the initial thing we thought of, but second of all, like I was saying earlier in the episode, right near the beginning, it's just a race is not used to mean the same thing that is used in D&D, and it becomes difficult to talk about actual race if you have that, right? Because if you have a game term that says your race is dwarf or your race is human, then if you have a human whose race is like something that is an actual race in game, it's like this human is their race is that they are a Kelid, right? But then it gets confusing because well, human is the race, so we can't say the race, and so then you have to say ethnicity for that, but it's not always ethnicity. You might have wanted to use race for that, and so by being more accurate to the real world definition, it just makes it a little bit easier. And by not using a word that has the real world definition that you might have wanted to use in the game. It's kind of like how outsider, do you remember, Stephen? Outsider used to be a term in D&D that meant like a extraplanar being of any kind. Like a devil or a demon or an angel. There are so many times where there were problems in adventures where there was like a village or a town or something. It's like, oh, well, this outsider has come in. And then people are like, what? It's a devil or an angel. Because outsider, the term, became a game term and it could not be used for its English word anymore. So there are reasons that you may want to regain the ability to use an English word for its actual meaning and take a word like ancestry that you probably would have almost never used anywhere else and make that be the game term from a game designer perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no. I get what you were going at, but was it ever an issue within, I guess, Paizo when you were there that, okay, we need to make the game more inclusive, and we may...
look, making games that are inclusive so that anyone can play, so that everyone feels welcome to be able to play the game, is something that I think every game creator wants to do, because why would you want to not welcome people to play the game unless they're like literally causing problems, right? As a player, like they're hurting other people who are playing the game, or they're doing something like bad towards your game, or spreading your game in a bad way. And Steven, I know you've said, well, all publicity is good publicity, but why would you not want to help people be able to feel more included? So of course that is true. And that's definitely true for Paizo. I mean, Paizo has always felt that gaming is for everyone. It's literally in the core rulebook. But the other thing about that, though, is that it was very important when we were putting that in the core rulebook that we wanted to make sure that that people could understand why, that it's to accept people. It's because when, at the beginning with D&D, when it was like this niche hobby with just the nerds in the basement, D&D players were kind of the outcasts sometimes, right? And like, Steven, were you always accepted by other people for playing Dungeons and Dragons? Because like,
I'm not accepted by my own family.
I was lucky that I was not discriminated against that much for it, right? But nerds and D&D players know what that's like. So why wouldn't we want to be inclusive? So the introduction in the core rulebook, it doesn't talk about it in a way that's like saying like, you're a bad person and we think you're not going to try to be inclusive, because why would you make it antagonistic like that? It's more of a like, thank you for like playing games, for joining games. Here are ways that can help other people be able to join games too. It's kind of like a celebration and positively themed rather than, chiding in that introduction. I think that's really, really important for truly trying to be inclusive and to get everyone to join in, to make it an aspiration rather than like a shaking your finger, if that makes sense.
I think what this article was trying to do and failed horribly, that we are doing a much better job at in this show today, is that some people, that D&D is becoming, in their quest to become more inclusive and accepting, they are sacrificing rules and balance to do that. And I sort of agree.
I don't think so.
Well, I
don't think that that's why.
Well, wait. I think people think that. Now, I think Pathfinder 2nd Edition was the perfect balance. I mean, I love Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and I felt like, I wouldn't have hired Mark if I didn't think it was genius. Like, it was like the perfect balance of exactly, like, it's inclusive, but yet it's still very competitive. In fact, I'd say it's very hard, Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And you can have both. Now, it's easier said than done, okay? We're trying to be inclusive and feeling that you are almost not offending anyone.
So here are you talking about those types of tools with respect to video games and how they put in sometimes accessibility tools to make the game easier so that more people can play them that maybe might not have been skilled enough to play Dark Souls or something like that? Is that what you're talking about here in terms of easier games to be more inclusive, like accessibility?
Well, I'm thinking like Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Here's a perfect example. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, people felt that it was very hard. So hard that on their own, that a lot of people decided that there's a new rule where you get a new feat, what is it, at first level, right?
Oh, okay, hold on, Steven.
Yes?
On their own?
Well, who came up with that? No, what? I thought you.
But Paizo, we put it in the Game Master Guide, and we made it an official variant rule where you can
Well,
get
official
the free
variant
archetype.
rule, but you didn't like that
But
rule.
it's not like people on. You just literally said on their own.
Well, I thought wasn't it online?
No, it wasn't on their own. We had an idea for that ahead of time.
Oh, okay.
I feel like I'm the one who wrote that rule set, but really everyone on the design team talked about it. I heard multiple others being
but
like,
that's
"You could
not
use it
in
to
the
all play pirates."
Okay, fine. That's not in the official rules, and I know you don't like that.
It's in the official rules
That you get that extra feat.
It's officially listed as a variant that you can choose.
Okay, it's a variant, but I'm saying
but it's officially in the Game Master Guide.
Okay,
Steven.
fine. You know what I'm getting.
Flanking is a variant rule in 5e.
Okay.
Feats were a variant rule in 5e 2014. Steven.
Okay, well,
remember
wait.
Feats were a variant rule in 2014.
Okay.
Everybody played it.
Wait. Free archetype, right? Most popular variant
it's
rule.
called free archetype. That's correct.
Variant rules. Now you just described what you literally. You're proving my point. These are all variant rules. You have base rules in D&D. Sorry, in Pathfinder, and then you have all these variant rules. And this is very important. By actually putting these rules in the book as variants, people feel that it is okay to use them in games because it has been blessed by the creators.
Yeah, that's actually why I put that in as a variant. All the ones I did, I wanted people to feel not just that they were safe to do that, but I wanted to put some wild stuff in there so that people felt that they were safe to make their own variants too.
Correct.
I love it when people are willing to mod the game, to change the difficulty up or down, to add different features into it. As a game designer, that makes me so happy. Sometimes people actually say it's like, I'm changing your game. Take that, game designer. I'd be like, what?
Hey, look, I agree 100%. And our books have a lot of variant rules in them because we want to give as many ways for you to play our game as possible. And we try to always add those. Now, this is the issue, is that well, what happens if you don't want to put in variant rules? And you have two options. Okay, I'm going to say to you, Mark, you have only one version of Pathfinder, and you can't put in any variant rules or very few variant rules.
Sure.
And you have it the way you have it now. But testing and the suits above you have shown that whatever the easiest, quote, easiest rule or the rule that makes the game as simple as possible, where, you know what, we don't like the fact that you have a limited number of attributes per ancestry. We'll just make it that you can choose anything you want. And I was like, well, yeah, sure, that's a variant rule. But it's like, no. That's the rule. And that's what I feel like D&D has been doing, is that they have been putting in, they've softened the game and made the game, not necessarily softer, but they've made it a superhero variant. And they don't put in rules to make the game more difficult or different. They just say, this is how the game is. Now they say, and they say it everywhere, it's your game, do it however you want. But they don't put in these variant rules. They don't come up with these variant rules. They have people like us come up with the variant rules.
Okay. I can tell you we do have some overlap on there, which is that it is very difficult for a GM when you tell the GM, yeah, the game is your game. Go ahead, make it strong enough to handle your players.
That's terrible.
Look, I love Pathfinder First Edition and 3.0, 3.5 D&D. I literally quit my PhD at MIT to join Paizo because of and during Pathfinder First Edition. It had that same problem as 5e, where there was nothing in the rules that helped me to balance my games. All of my players' characters were way imbalanced compared to what the game said that they would be. I could still do it, but then again, I was then hired to create RPGs. So I, at the time, did not realize this when I was like, it's not as hard as people said. It's like, no, I actually had more skills than I thought, even at the time, to be able to handle this load. So I get it, and I agree with you on that point, but I don't think it's at all related to whether or not they were trying to be a more inclusive game that caused that. I don't think they said, let's make the game easier so more people can play it and make it so that the deadly encounters are super easy to win the deadly encounters and you just cakewalk through. I think that was by accident because they made things a little bit too overpowered and they allowed combinations that were a little bit too spicy for game design perspective, personally. And that's why it came up. But I do think you have a good point. One thing, I've mentioned this in my last AMA that I did, my Roll for Combat AMA on Reddit, that I kind of wish I had included in the Game Master Guide. I would have, if I was around for the remaster, someone's like, what was one thing you might have added? I would have probably added this, which is difficulty levels. Just explicit, okay, that the company gives you to have difficulty levels for the game. And I would have named them so that you didn't feel bad about going lower than the default one. So I could have, I would have had a story mode where all the encounters are 2 levels lower than what it lists in the game book. And you still get the XP as if it was 2 levels higher. And the description of that would be there, pretty much no encounters will be challenging. Maybe the bosses will have a little veneer of challenge, but you kind of just go through and win it. And to some extent, Pathfinder 1st or 5th edition can have that feel for optimized parties, although bad guys can sometimes really wipe you out if they wind up being strong, especially in Pathfinder 1. So it's not always that way. Then above story mode, I would put something like, I don't know, like heroic mode, where the things are 1 level lower than you and you feel super strong, but there still can be a challenge in the boss fight at the end. Then I would have one that was called like some kind of name that made it clear that it was okay not to play this. So I wouldn't call it normal mode or something like that, but it would be like the some kind of word for it that isn't normal, and be like, this is the mode, this is where you don't change anything. This is what the designers originally thought for experienced players who work together as a team. You might run into trouble if you don't, and you might want to play heroic mode. Maybe you could call, I don't know, gritty mode or like something like that. And then you have like the hardcore mode where it's just like everything is 1 harder. You might just like almost no fights are easy enough. You might easily die. And if you fight an extreme encounter, good luck, because especially at low. And then I would say in that hardcore mode, I would be like, at low levels, you probably don't want to use this mode, but by higher levels, you can. And then I might have like death mode that's 2 levels higher and be like, you can't even use this at low levels, even if your group are super optimizers or tactical. And if we had that in there, I think that could help D&D and Pathfinder to have something like that. Although the problem with D&D is, again, that certain combos are a little powerful compared to what they expected.
Well, you see, this is why I like Pathfinder, is that Pathfinder is pretty tough. It's hard. And a lot of the variants are designed, like you started out hard, and then the variants are included to change the game or to make it easier or some combination of it. And a lot of people choose them. And because these variants are in the freaking official rules, no one feels bad using them. Everyone feels comfortable bringing them up. And everyone feels comfortable saying, hey, you know what? This variant, I've read about it. It's in the rules. People like it on Reddit. Can we use it? And people are like, sure. As opposed to, I absolutely freaking hate that the D&D is like, oh, well, you just figure it out. Easier said than done. I'm like, you just figure it out? What? I'm like, how? It's not just you figure it out. Like, I'm a DM. I have to do all this prep, and I got to figure it out, and then I can convince 4 freaking players to use something to make the game, in this case, harder. I'm like, or easy. Well, easier. They'll probably always go with easier, but it's like, why? I'm just getting to the point that I felt like this was a missed opportunity with D&D 2024 edition, is they could have made the game, and that's what I was hoping for. They would have made the game
more comprehensive and a little crunchier.
Yes, and a little tougher.
There's no way that we're going to do that.
Oh, I know they weren't.
And here's why, Steven.
I know. Oh, I know.
You're preaching to the choir with me, and I like having explicit rules, because I think there are a lot of GMs out there who feel comforted knowing that there is a consistent official rule.
No, I know they
do
want
that type of thing.
They want
but
official rules.
There are a lot of people who actually feel anxious about it, and it's just totally style, right? I feel comforted knowing that there's a baseline rule that's like fairly parallel that works for anything, and once I learn it once, I can apply it anywhere, and that the rules have my back. That makes me feel like I can improvise wildly, and I'll still be okay. And I am very improvisational. Some people who are improvisational, though, feel that they're trapped because they feel like there's rules that are hiding around that they do not know where they are. partially can be due to bad layout. Look, there were things hidden in Pathfinder 1 that almost no one had ever heard of in certain places that was just like, that's there. Like, where like you may have known about 20 and 50% mischances, but there was like a 30% mischance in the woods in one weird environment section in PF1. It was like, who knows that, right? But people feel afraid that they're going to mess up or get it wrong. And like that means they can't improvise and they can't kind of play the game, that they have to stop everything to make sure it's right every time. And so that is a concern for some players, and I get it. And especially with people who are kind of new to tabletop role-playing games, you don't know that they're going to be someone who feels comforted by having that framework. And even if they are, it sometimes is a little bit of buy-in before they learn the framework and feel comforted by it. So
I'm wondering,
all that being said, there was no way that we're going to do that.
I know. Well,
there's a whole category of people who would have been very upset.
I read something that the average D&D sessions before they like taper off, it's like the number of sessions people start before they stop playing. What do you think it is, Mark?
The average, is this the mean or the median?
I don't know.
Very important.
I don't know.
What?
I don't know, to be honest.
Okay. Well, I'm going to guess the median number of sessions that people play, counting everyone in the world.
Everyone in the world. Yeah, this is everyone in the world. This is everyone.
Is like 2.
It's
because of the fact that a lot of people would have played 1, and then that would be it, because somebody convinces them to play it one time. Well, it might even be 1 if you use median and not mean. If more than half of people only played 1,
it's I think it's mean because it's 7.
Okay,
so that includes,
I mean, that could be the median too. Yeah. I don't know.
So it's 7 now.
People in chat are on fire. They guessed 5 and 6.
I know. I think this is kind of well known
in chat.
Yeah,
I picked 2.
Yeah,
I was very, very pessimistic because
you also have to then put in the people who, like me, who have played 500 sessions.
Oh yeah, that's the thing about me that I was worried about, because you know, there are people like us who have played maybe over 1,000 sessions.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm talking about one game. I'm talking about one
into account
game.
Only people who have ever played, and you get these thousands.
Oh yeah, right. So they really mess it up.
Really weights it over.
So if you take out that weighting, it's probably closer like 2 or 3. And I feel that D&D was designed. They know this. Okay, they're a corporation, and they're looking at the numbers, and they're like, the average number of people who play this game is just a handful. So we need to make sure that this game is as easy to understand, as inclusive as possible, so that you can get in, play it, enjoy it, and then get out. And that's it. And I feel like Pathfinder is not that. Pathfinder is a lifestyle game where, sure, you could play it like that. People don't. I bet you the average number for Pathfinder is much higher. I don't think it's like 50, but it's probably at least in the teens rather than 7. I bet you it's higher than 7. And that's the issue, is that there's a big difference between a game that you play for 7 sessions and feel like you got enough out of it versus a game that you play for 700 sessions. And I feel like where criticism is coming for D&D 20, D&D 5th edition, is the people who are watching the show right now who are playing these games every week, hundreds of sessions. And when you start playing the games, you see the cracks quickly. You see the stretch marks very fast. You see the pain points. And you realize this game was not designed for long-term play. And more importantly, and this is the sadder part, is I don't think WoTC cares. That's not a bug, that's a feature. And I think that's another aspect of this article, without them saying it, is that they're trying to make this a game that you buy, you play, and maybe you get hooked on it. And if you do, that you maybe play 5th edition, probably you go play something else. You probably play Shadow Dark or Pathfinder or one of the other billion games out there.
I think that's actually a charitable interpretation, that they want people to play other games.
Well, I don't think they
I
want.
think they'd love to keep you in their ecosystem and their
Well,
walled garden if they
that
can.
is where the online system comes out of the VTT, which is a whole other subject. But my point is that they're trying to make this a onboarding experience. And way back when there was basic Dungeons and Dragons and advanced Dungeons and Dragons, you know what? It's time to bring it back. I swear to God, it is time to bring back advanced Dungeons and Dragons because
because
I
people
know
just
it
thought they
didn't
were
work.
all advanced. It didn't work for the same reason the strategy guide didn't work at Paizo.
I know. Why didn't the
But
strategy
Steven-
guide work?
So I will explain that, and then I want to talk about how I now understand what you were coming from.
Okay.
When you were things you were talking about before,
Okay.
I think we just were not using the same term. But
No. It was
strategy guide
tough.
did not work at
yeah.
Paizo. It was a great idea for a product if anyone would have bought it, which is Pathfinder 1 is very complicated, and the combos you can make are very strong if you make them. And if you just kind of randomly pick things that look good, you can have a character that will lose badly, even as much as I often talk on this channel about characters that destroy everything. So the strategy guide was like, it didn't help you make the meme builds that crush the game into oblivion, but it helped you avoid falling into pitfalls and make a coherent character that did the kind of cool thing that you would want to do. And it was great. It had tips also for starting players and players who wanted to learn more about some of the complex stuff in the game. But it wasn't popular because everybody was like, well, that's not me. If they were deeply into the game and they really did know everything, then they were right that they didn't have much to gain from the strategy guide. And so they wanted to skip it. People who were in the middle were like, no, I don't need a strategy guide. And so they wanted to skip it. New people didn't know there was a strategy guide or wouldn't necessarily be shared with it because it wasn't something an experienced person would buy and then show to their new players, even though that would actually be really good. So it just didn't do that well. And it's and the same reason everyone wanted to play Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, Steven. I was a tiny kid and I played Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, not the regular one because it looked more advanced. Okay. I want to go back now.
Yeah.
I understand and agree with you more about what you were talking about, but the reason why we were confused is, as for many of these things online that lead to these big wars, the definition of terms. You were using the word inclusive when what you're really talking about is whether or not the game is easy to pick up, whether it's an acquisition-based game where it has a light amount of buy-in complexity, whether it's easy for just about anybody to learn it quickly and it's simple.
I think it's both.
But
I think
that
it's
is not actually like, because Pathfinder 2 inclusivity was a very big goal of it, but it was not a goal that said that it needs to be as easy to play as possible. Right?
Well, I think they were doing both.
It was a different thing about it. The word inclusive does not necessarily mean that. Accessibility is the word that's often used when you're talking about difficulty levels, that the ability to make it be easier so that it is accessible to a wider audience, whereas inclusivity tends to be used more whether or not it's welcoming to a wider audience because of the things that are included in it.
Let me further clarify. I actually think they're doing both. I think they're trying to be inclusive and accessible, and they're trying.
Not saying they're not.
By doing so, they're really like all the rough edges are sanded off. Like this thing is, I'm literally playing with a Nerf gelatinous cube, and I'm like, this is Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition right here. It's a Nerf ball. it is so nerfy, and that's fine. I actually don't mind playing small versions of 5e when I feel like I want to be a damn superhero. You know what? Sometimes playing Pathfinder is too much because damn, my guys, they're always fighting for their lives, and it can be exhausting, those sessions. You know what? Sometimes you just want to kick ass and take names and not feel like you're going to die every time you play the game.
Well, the funny thing is, though, Steven, the rough edges that we're talking about from like OD&D, PF2 and 5e both sended it off. Pathfinder 2 just has a higher innate difficulty level because A, it doesn't have combinations that you can build to be way above the expected combination.
Right.
B, also 5e, even if you don't do that, is a little bit easier. But like both of those two systems got rid of most of the times that you can just fail a save and be out of the fight. In fact, I would argue in Pathfinder 2, it's less likely than in 5e for there to be effects that will just completely take you out for a while. Because you usually have to critically fail in Pathfinder 2 for that to happen. Or it's incapacitation. So if you fight 8 harpies or monsters that can do that, they have to be lower level than you. And so they won't be able to. I think that in some extent, the rough edges were more sended off in Pathfinder. Some people sometimes do complain about that, who like the rough edges. But that the difference is purely in the difficulty level vis-a-vis either intentional difficulty level changes or, in most cases, unintended combinations that they did not prepare for.
Okay, I'm going to give you an analogy. Maybe you'll get it, maybe you won't.
Okay.
Pathfinder First Edition was like Action Park. Remember Action Park? What used to be called Traction Park. I see you looking it up.
I'm looking it up.
There's a documentary on Netflix about Action Park. Action Park was a
was it the one that killed people in New Jersey?
Yeah, it was. And we're talking about rough edges like that. It was so horrible. Action Park, people were dying, people were getting injured every day. People were getting seriously injured, and this place was open for years. That's the 80s, baby. You could never do that today. Pathfinder 2nd Edition, I feel, is not Disneyland, but I'd say Universal Studios Islands of Adventure. Like, it's great. And yeah, there's edges sanded off, but it's just so much freaking fun. And it's just so much is there. And it's just so much you can do that you don't mind. Like, what you lost is not as much as what you gained, in my opinion. Okay. And
I'm glad you feel that way. Since
right.
Those are the kind of trade-offs that I had to, be part of the decision-making process.
Right. But then you see 5e, and again, this is just my opinion. I see 5e and I see Sesame Place. It's a really safe place. Like, it is, Sesame Place is an amusement park. If none of you are from the East Coast, I'm mentioning all amusement parks on the East Coast. It's an amusement park for kids, or a water park. It's really safe. And again, it's fun.
Water parks aren't as safe as you think.
I know they're not. I know, but my point is,
actually, water park is an excellent idea compared to Universal Studios Islands of Adventure, because water parks feel very safe,
right?
But they're actually maybe not. Maybe Islands of Adventure actually has more of the edges sanded off.
Yeah, probably.
In the end. But actually, that's a beautiful analogy. By the way, I will buy Water Country USA or whatever versus Islands of Adventure versus Action Park for Pathfinder 1. And note that Steven is trying to be fair here. He put Pathfinder 1, a game that both of us really loved playing for a long time, as the death amusement park in New Jersey that killed all the people.
Yeah, it was very rough. But the thing about Sesame Place, I love Sesame Place. I went there many times. There's nothing wrong with Sesame Place. Now, I went there with kids. I'm not going to go there now. And I have great memories there. I have pictures on my walls of me with my kids at Sesame Place. There's nothing wrong with Sesame Place. But I don't always want to go to Sesame Place, And heck, I don't even always want to go to Islands of Adventure, or I don't even want to go to Action Park, right? And that's the thing.
I honestly never want to go to Action Park because it killed people. So that is where the analogy somewhat breaks down. I did love Pathfinder 1.
I never went to Action Park. My parents would allow me. Even they were like, my parents were pretty liberal, and they're like, even that place we're not letting you go because that's too dangerous.
Your parents are very smart because, Steven, you may have some of the best luck of anyone out there, but there's no reason to test it at that.
No, do not test that. No. It used to be called Traction Park, and there's several documentaries on Action Park. Look them up. They had the best commercials in the world, by the way. They were
I've seen some things about it. I just didn't remember its name. So as soon as I looked it up, I was like, oh, it's that one.
Yeah, it's that one. It was notorious for just being a death trap, that place. Yeah, someone wrote, so we reached a generation where coddling and bubble wrap are the norm compared to scrapes and casts.
I still do not believe, and maybe I am wrong, I have not talked to them on this, but I do not believe that the level of easiness that some people have of like, oh yeah, my single character can solo these encounters that are above deadly, they're supposed to be for the whole party. I don't believe that the ability to make builds that are that strong was actually an intentional feature. I do think that they
Oh
were
no,
hoping it
definitely
would be
not.
more balanced than that.
Oh no, no, no. I
No,
don't
to a
think
degree,
they.
the amount that 5e is easy is partially due to like some imbalances in the game's design.
Yeah, but I don't
But it is
understand.
true that they wanted to make it easy to play. That doesn't mean that it's automatically easy to win.
Exactly.
Just, it turns out that it is also easy
Well,
to
look,
win.
I'll give you a perfect example. Shadow Dark.
Yes, Shadow Dark's really easy to learn how to play.
Very easy to play.
That's one of the reasons
Very
Shadow Dark
hard.
is so successful.
Right.
It's frictionless, and it has a few things that the 5e people who are coming into it will recognize so they can learn it faster. But it's also simple and has some of the elegance from the old school games too. It's not necessarily easy to win, right?
Oh my God. Professor Dungeon Master said, I went to Action Park many times. My sister's boat was hit and the gas tank burst and she was nearly blinded. That actually happened. Yeah, it's Action Park's pretty nuts. Like, look it up. It is like I this is why when we talk about like what it was like to be in the 80s, it was rough, man. It was rough. It's like our playgrounds were made out of metal that got so hot you were getting like first and second degree burns as a kid with sharp edges. You'd be on like, jungle gyms that could kill you. You were going to Action Park for fun. I mean, it was just that's why the Stranger Things. It was brutal, man. It was brutal back then. And I think the pendulum has swung way too far the other way, personally. And I think it's going back just from...
You'd rather it be Action Park?
No. I feel like,
quite
frankly, I felt like the 90s and the 2000s were kind of the sweet spot, where people and safety were getting more serious, and yet you didn't have to sacrifice fun. And I feel like we are becoming so safety conscious that fun is being a good example. And I'm actually still angry. You're getting a third story, Mark. You're getting a third story that you've never heard
amusement
before.
Park safety?
No, it's a little different. Okay? They had this thing in my daughter's 5th grade where they taught ballroom dancing to all the 5th graders. Now, you didn't have to do it, but most of them did. And they would learn ballroom dancing with a partner, and then you would come and watch them do ballroom dancing. It was great. The kids, they learned a lot.
Sounds great.
It was great. And you could probably see where I'm going with this. I loved it.
Was there some parent who was like, how dare you do ballroom dancing? My son is a man. He shouldn't be doing dancing or something?
You're getting there. But yes, basically, we watched it. Robin, I had pictures, I had videos of it. She's 10. She's cute as can be. The kids look great. They enjoyed it. Everyone had fun. It was done by this person who would go around all their schools doing it. All that. And we're talking about freaking ballroom dancing. We're not talking. Someone said lawn darts. It's not lawn darts. It's not Action Park. Okay, we're talking about freaking dancing. I'm freaking Footloose here. I can't believe I'm talking about Footloose. And yeah, someone complained, and it was banned.
Wow.
And I'm like, really? And my son didn't get to do it. And I'm still freaking mad about that. I'm like, this way you can't have nice things. I'm like, what? Like, someone complained. It's like, oh, we got to error. No one can be offended. No one can be offended whatsoever.
Well, there's a lot of issues with the way that education is structured, with like the parents and the administration and the teachers. And I definitely hear from teachers who feel like they're really in a vice based on all of that, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say something about peanut butter, because, like, peanuts aren't allowed, or, like, we used to be able to bring snacks to school, but then the list got so strict that they just gave up. They're like, nah, there's no more snacks. Like, remember you would go and you would be someone's birthday and everyone would have cupcakes? Yeah, that's all gone. They don't have anything now. It's like, yeah, happy birthday, and that's it. You're not allowed to. They used to at least bring stuff, but there was a
Was
list of
some
what
of
you
that
couldn't.
because of legal liability reasons where they were getting sued
Yeah,
when
and also they
and
just
then they wanted
decided.
to cover their butts?
Yes, but also then they're just like, you know what? It's easier just to say no to everything. So now ballroom dancing gone, square dancing gone. They used to have this thing called was it like Colonial Day? Oh, Colonial Day, where they actually went back to colonial times. You can already see where that's going. Oh, they can't dress like that anymore. Gone. That's gone. They used to have it. Gone. Everything's gone. And we're not talking about, you're saying back in my day? This isn't back in my day. This is back in my kids' day. This was just a few years ago. Okay, we're talking about like 5 years ago. We're not talking about 100 years ago. And I don't want to get into this too much, but
Yeah,
there's
I hear you. I hear
you
you
got
on
what I'm
that,
getting at.
and
Like
you
there's
you can
safety.
see where things have gone.
Yeah. Like it's
To bring it back around, we are getting towards the end of my time of where I can be here, but I think that we had a pretty good discussion, especially considering that the actual topic and the way that the New York Times article did it was so like such a nothing. Like that they really just tried to create this war out of something that very few people actually were up in arms about.
Yeah.
But there was, as we showed, there was interesting discussion to be had about how you design ancestry, species, race, whatever you want to call it. And there is interesting discussion to be had about accessibility and difficulty of games. And I think the difficulty levels would have been great.
By the
it's
way,
just something I can't believe I didn't think of it during the time when we were actually doing the game, because I think that would have just been awesome for people to and yes, you could obviously just do that. People online suggest it even to raise or lower the difficulty. But if there's an easy way to do it like that with an encounter builder that mostly works, it's just trying to make the game a little bit harder, then why would we not have put it in there just because we didn't think of it in order to make people feel that it's official and that therefore they're allowed to do it?
Just FYI, some people are saying, I just work in pharmacy. I work in pharmaceuticals, so I do know this. People saying allergies seem to be more serious now for whatever reason. Actually, to be honest, it's the testing tools. The testing for allergies are just way better now, and it's not that people didn't have the allergies back then. People just thought they was the same thing, and there's a lot more tools to test allergies and to get more specific allergy down. And to be honest, the tools to fight allergies now, I actually do a lot of work on pharmaceuticals for allergy medicine, so I know a lot about it, are really good. Like there's a lot of excellent allergy medicine, and almost all of it is completely safe. It's very, very, very safe to use. Now, don't quote me on that because I'm not a doctor, but it is very safe to use because all it does is block your inhibitors in your cells. Anyhow.
That's good. That's good. Random side thing that for
random side thing. Here. If you're taking out, no, because people are like, oh, take allergy medicine. Trust me, it's a life changer too once you start taking it.
Right.
So,
all right, everybody. So, Happy New Year! Thanks for joining us. And Stephen, do you have a fourth news story? Because those were actually all news stories.
I know it's a new year, new stories. Well, I always tell the same ones. Wow,
but we had some good ones. No, it's fine.
Three is pretty good. Yeah,
save the other ones for the next time for people so that they can hear it too. But if anyone else who's watching this hasn't checked it out yet, it is January 1st. So if you're backers for us on the Year of Titans, we are working on getting backer kit to whenever they respond, have it come in.
Well, they're closed. They're closed today, so it's just going to happen when backer
they're
kit.
Closed today, so it's not going to happen.
No, it'll happen. It's 48 hours from when I press the button, and I pressed the button. When you pressed the button. It was at night, so it's probably going to be later tonight.
Probably be tonight.
Yeah, but I'll do it as soon as it gets on. I can't do it. I tried to manually unlock it. Basically, you have to push it over the border. It's like you have to push it from unlock to lock. You have to lock down the orders and charge them, and then I can put out all the products. I'm just waiting for that to happen, and it happens 48 hours after I press the button. I didn't know that, so I pressed the button 48 hours. I probably pressed it about 42 hours ago. So
Oh, okay.
we
So
got
it'll
like
be
another
later tonight,
4 to 6
probably.
hours
So
to wait. Yeah, and then I'll get everything
everyone.
out soon.
And when you see that it is available, if you didn't back, you should be. But when it comes available, you should be able to get Trolls, right, Steven? They
Trolls
won't get
comes out
Titans
right
because
away.
Titans will be at the end if you didn't back.
Trolls comes out
So
today right away, and then Titans for anyone who backed early. And if you are also are a regent, a Titan, whatever, a Herald, you'll get Snow Souls in 2 weeks. You get to check out Snow Souls. I think Mark wrote 2 of the last 3 ancestries.
I did because of the fact that I wrote the special one and I wrote Snow Souls. Those are in fact the only ones. I was only planning on writing the special, the Titans, because it's the meta story and I needed to make sure it fit. But it turned out that I was more interested in Snow Souls than all of our authors were. And so I was like, okay, I'll write it. I'm very interested in it. And I think it was cool. You said you liked it, right, Steven? You liked all the crazy things that were going on with the frozen condition?
Troll, yes. I have some notes, but yes, I do like the snow. I think it was really interesting, but when you actually put in like temperature gauges and like things have to be hot and cold, and I was like, okay, we got to maybe simplify that a little, but I have an idea to make that.
Well, Steven, I simplified it as much as possible without being absolutely unplayable. Because if we just did it one step up and down, or the number of steps up and down of mild cold, the problem is that I looked at it and the actual temperature band of some of these mild heats is only like 5 degrees.
Got it.
So I was going to do it you could count it as 2 steps lower or more. And I had to split up the middle band because it was like 50 degrees and I was making you lose a 50 degrees being safe.
Okay,
and
that makes
5
sense.
Degrees being
okay,
safe.
That's fine. Then you answered my question.
Unfortunately, the temperature bands were too imbalanced in how large they were.
You
I knew what you were going to suggest
because
I also, that's what I wrote first. And then I tried to look at it. I was like, wow, so you'll only be okay in like
I think it'll be
degrees.
okay. I think it'll be okay. Like, as long as they know they're not going into a desert or something, it's like...
Yeah, and there are feats to handle it if you want to do that.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Happy New Year. Take care. And until next time, if you want to battle the zoo, you have to roll for combat. Bye, everybody.